Back in 2020, the state of New Jersey adopted new health and sexual education requirements. At the time, the standards passed without much fanfare, but now as towns and villages have written and begun implementing curricula that meet these standards, and as midterms are around the corner, many communities across New Jersey have seen pushback, contentious Board of Education meetings, and parents in a tizzy, though ultimately it does seem like a minority of parents. I'm guessing I am not telling you something you don't know. Many of you, I'm sure, have been following along with this news. The new standards align more closely with what we have been teaching in Unitarian Universalism for decades. First through the About Your Sexuality program that I had as a young person, and now through the Our Whole Lives program. The New Jersey standards have been called progressive, and they certainly are an improvement, but they are by no means like aggressively progressive. They introduce later many of the things that here we would argue are important to begin to teach kids as soon as they can begin to notice the differences between families and people, and the differences in what the media shows them, because yes, even our littlest children are subject to the implicit and insidious biases from TV shows, magazines, music. Of course, in the school system, parents can choose to opt out of certain elements of the programming if, as the Department of Education released in a statement, their parent or guardian informs the school principal in writing that the instruction conflicts with their conscience or sincerely held moral or religious beliefs. This is an accommodation offered to those parents with concerns. The standards are not overly complex. You can access them online. They offer indicators of what children should have been taught by the end of 2nd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade. There are core areas and concepts identified: personal growth and development, pregnancy and parenting, emotional health, social and sexual health, community health services and support, movement skills and concepts, because you have to remember this also includes physical education. So physical fitness is one of them, lifelong fitness, nutrition, personal safety, health conditions, diseases and medicines, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, dependency, substance disorders, and treatment. Those are the core concepts. And it is embedded in that one social and sexual health core concept that questions of sexuality and gender expression come into play. And having looked at the standards, I can tell you that they require that by the end of 5th grade, students have learned that, quote, all individuals should feel welcome and included regardless of their gender, gender expression, or sexual orientation, by the end of 5th grade. So I'm gonna go ahead and tip my hand right now and tell you that I don't see a reason why children younger than 5th grade shouldn't be taught that, the inclusion of all people, shouldn't be taught about the existence of and beauty of and awesomeness of our lesbian, gay, transgender, queer, and more siblings. I'm sure that's not going to shock you that I have, but I will also admit to you that as a parent, it took me a minute to figure out how to do that in my own life, how to truly be an ally to the people that I love, to truly open the door to ensure that my children know that they're free to be themselves and they'll be loved no matter what. I move through the world with all the privileges that come with being cisgender and heterosexual. And I had to learn things that I hadn't been taught, even as a UU from New York City. And I had to learn how to proactively hold open space for my children, starting as young as 4 years old, when they were asking questions about boys and girls and that person we saw on the street and the feelings they had inside themselves. The truth is that I had to come to grips with how to talk in age-appropriate ways to my children about a lot of things, as every parent does: money, politics, racism, and sexuality and gender expression. Now, I can't say this clearly enough. What we have all been told over and over by medical professionals and LGBTQ folks themselves is this: talking about the existence of and the value of LGBTQ folks will not make a child LGBTQ. Reading books about trans kids will not make a cisgender kid suddenly become trans. Reading about families with 2 dads will not make a heterosexual child gay. And here's the really big important point, like here's the but at the end of all that. So what if it did, right? There is nothing inherently wrong with or immoral about or bad about being LGBTQ. Nothing. That's a fundamental truth that we affirm together. We, our society, our culture, we make it hard to be LGBTQ because of the prejudice and fear and violence we can't seem to shake. But there is not a single thing wrong with our LGBTQ siblings being exactly who they are. What's wrong is the hate and the oppression that they're forced to face. Now, the counterpoint to this point that talking about things doesn't make a child become them, the counterpart to that point is even more important. Not reading about the glorious diversity of humanity, not teaching about it, not speaking about it, not affirming it actively, not engaging in representation about the vast array of ways to be human, hiding this part of humanity from our children, it is not going to turn an LGBTQ child or youth cisgender or heterosexual. All it's going to do is work to create shame and fear. All it will do is make children feel they need to hide who they are, who their families are. All it will do is render it unsafe and nearly impossible for them to be their true whole selves in the communities they live in. And that is a cost way too high to bear for those children and youth, and it becomes a loss to all of us. We talk here all the time about the wholeness of self and being your full self. We're denying that to others. Now, I realize I'm largely preaching to the choir. I believe that all of you sitting here, even if you have found yourselves at times confused by terminology or struggling to get pronouns right, I believe that each of you in your heart of hearts believes what our values teach us. That the circle of welcoming, the circle of love, the circle of affirmation and celebration and joy extends to our LGBTQ siblings as it does to any and all people around this earth, regardless of religion or history or ethnicity or age or economic status or sexuality or gender expression or anything else. Just like our welcome words say every Sunday. But we live in communities, even those of us here in the supposedly liberal Northeast, that do not fully embrace those same values. Back in August, there was a Board of Education meeting here in Ridgewood at which public comments on the new standards and the new curricula were welcomed. 2 people got up to speak during the public comment time. One woman got up who wanted to confirm that kindergartners would not be exposed to any conversation about gender identity or sexuality. She says that while she is supportive of affirming all types of families, she wants the option to pull her child out of any conversation that might go like this, and this is a quote. "Hey, Owen, do you feel like you're a girl today?" Now, y'all, there are so many bizarre and harmful levels to that. It's kind of hard to even parse it out. There is no curriculum that would include this as a question to a child, right? Our teachers can confirm that. And this mother's fear is showing, and also, I think we can safely say, her ignorance. All around her kindergartner are LGBTQ folks and the amazing differences that exist in human living. Withholding that truth and that affirmation only creates division. It doesn't keep her child safe from anything because there is no danger except to the trans kids when we withhold affirmation. Try to hide the truth of their existence or actively advocate against them. Then a gentleman got up to speak, and he said, this is a quote, "I think there's a way in which, and it's a judgment thing, it's a prudence thing, but I think there's a way in which when you introduce a topic, you give it air, you reify it, you make it real in a way that maybe wasn't there before. I question how much we give life to things when they're introduced so early." Now, his narrative illustration for this was to share about his family having brought a book home from the public library about Katherine Johnson, who was one of the Black female NASA scientists, you may remember from the book and the subsequent movie Hidden Figures, right? The point he makes is that this children's book about Johnson makes a brief comment towards the end about how Johnson faced adversity and overcame challenges. And this man recounts how his first-grade child, who he calls innocent, looked up at him and asked what that meant, and how this book introduced things he didn't think needed introducing, because, as he said in admittedly different words, his son didn't know about racism and sexism and the challenge of those, and now he had to tell his child. Again, many layers, not the least of which is the privilege of being white and male with a mommy and a daddy. First grade Black children, first grade children of color in general understand racism. First grade girls understand sexism. And first grade white boys understand their privilege. I have 3 white boys, I know this. They understand their privilege whether we admit it or not. Studies show that young children, certainly by first grade, have internalized all sorts of prejudices from the world around them. And more to the point, children of color, children of gay parents, children who are gay, children with trans family or who are trans themselves don't have the privilege of the innocence this man wants to protect for his own child. What he's protecting, I think, if we're honest, is privilege, not innocence. He also thanked God that the curriculum doesn't call for teaching children how to masturbate, as if there would be, what, like an instructional video? Like, I don't even. And gratitude that teaching them about assisted reproductive technology or IVF comes at much older ages. As someone who used help from doctors and a donor to get pregnant with my children, unless I wanted to lie to them and create a whole mess of shame about how they came into this world, I didn't have the luxury of hiding the truth of ART and IVF from my kids. And frankly, why would I even want to? This is the piece that folks who resist the new curriculum seem to fail to understand. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, asexual folks, and more have existed for as long as humans have existed. No curriculum or lack of curriculum will change that truth. LGBTQ folks exist and have a right to that existence that is as inalienable as anyone else's. All that changes when we're secretive and awkward and dishonest and withholding with ourselves and with our children, all that changes when we do that is whether or not LGBTQ folks will feel ashamed and oppressed and forced to hide, or will feel safe, affirmed, loved, and welcomed into the circle of humanity, which is their birthright. Both Jon Stewart and John Oliver recently did episodes on the current legislative threats to gender-affirming care. So you should go and watch these episodes. It is very worthwhile. I'm sure they did them right now because midterms are here. And many conservatives are working very hard to spread misinformation still about youth sports and bathrooms, as they have for years, but now also about what we call gender-affirming care. And it's in order to drum up fear-based votes. That seems quite evident. Just this past week, Florida passed some regulations circumventing their legislature, actually. They passed it through their board of medical directors who are appointed by the governor, right? So they circumvented the potential will of the people. And this set of regulations prevents doctors from giving care to new youth patients. And it disallows prescribing puberty blockers until a youth is 18, well past the onset of puberty for most children, making the ban a dangerous threat to the health and well-being of trans kids. So I'm going to take a little bit of a step back to make sure we sort of go over what gender-affirming care even is, right? So of course, anti-trans folks have been spreading the ridiculous notion that children are getting life-altering, irreversible surgeries, right? This is not happening, okay? That's like the most important thing to understand. It's not happening. More often than not, for especially young children, gender-affirming care means simply being allowed to live socially as the gender that they are. So that might mean a new name, a haircut, different types of clothing. As a child gets older and puberty looms, the next step often is hormone blockers, right? So these put puberty on hold as a child grows to understand who they are and what they need to feel at home in their physical body. The next step might involve hormone treatments, so receiving hormones that help to align a body with a person's gender. Now, Oliver points out that some folks say these kinds of treatments are experimental or dangerous. They are, in fact, time-tested and totally reversible. I have shared with you before that I have something called polycystic ovarian syndrome, and that particular set of symptoms can bring with it elevated testosterone. So when I was finally diagnosed at 17, I had twice as much testosterone as a 17-year-old girl is typically supposed to have in the understanding of the medical community. And among the medications I take to manage my PCOS is an anti-androgen that blocks the production of male hormones. It's a small, tiny thing compared to folks whose bodies don't align with their gender, but I can assure you that the anti-androgens absolutely help me feel more at home in my own body. They've been around for decades, and they are completely reversible. Only once a child is an older teenager does the possibility of surgery enter into play, and for it to happen before they're 18 requires the child, the parents, doctors, psychology professionals to sign off on it. More often than not, any physically altering surgeries are done after adulthood has been reached. The idea that children are being operated on is a boogeyman that folks are holding up to try and continue to oppress trans children, youth, and their families. A boogeyman to deny them the very expensive care that comes with aligning a body to a gender. Another 11 states, there are 4 with bans, I guess 5 now that Florida's done its regulations as of a few days ago. Another 11 states are trying to push into families and medical lives in this way, trying to dictate how individuals and doctors care. Meanwhile, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, among many other institutions, all endorse gender-affirming care. It makes an unbelievable difference in people's lives. Anita talked about the pain of having to hide who she is, about having to hold back instead of being her whole self. That's what we ask of trans folks when we refuse care, right? We're asking them to hide themselves. It's what we ask of gay folks when we automatically assume heterosexuality as a baseline without leaving space for other options. It's what we ask of all LGBTQ folks if we insist that the inclusion of their very existence in our curricula is up for debate. We're asking them to hide, be themselves only when it has explicitly been stated that it is safe for them to be so, only when the kids are old enough, only when it suits us. It should be possible for people to be safe, to be themselves at all times. There was recently another presentation of the curriculum here in Ridgewood. I know that Ira was there, and Carol was there, and Kristen was there. I know that UUs were there to speak up for the value of clear, honest, affirming sexual education that teaches all children about the gorgeous diversity of humanity and makes sure they know that they can be themselves too. I am grateful to all of our people who showed up for this advocacy work on behalf of all of our children. Because the truth is, right now, the children are having to advocate for themselves. In his episode on this topic, John Oliver makes the point that, quote, if a child has to be an activist, we have already failed that child. He lifts up in particular a young trans girl, just 11, named Kai, who went before her state legislature to argue for her right to exist. She said a whole bunch of amazing things, which you'll get to hear if you go on to this episode. But among them was that she would rather not be in front of a bunch of adults telling them how they should behave. And she also said, God made me, God loves me for who I am, and God does not make mistakes. Whether or not you believe in God, that's some powerful self-affirming theology from an 11-year-old. And though our theology might be different, our end place is the same. We do not believe that LGBTQ folks are a mistake or any of the other nasty things we have all heard said. We believe they are full of inherent worth and dignity, holy, beautiful, amazing, imperfect as we all are, and perfect humans. We believe that our LGBTQ siblings are an integral part of the human family, deserving justice, safety, care, and respect. And when we believe that, we have to act like we believe it, which means showing up at school board meetings, voting our beliefs, donating our time and resources to agencies that work to ensure justice and safety for LGBTQ folks, endorsing the curricula that we do here at USR, learning to teach it, bringing our children to it, sharing the good news of it out in the world. We have to understand that while progress has been made, we still live in a world that privileges cisgender, heterosexual folks. And those of us who walk through this world with those privileged identities have to get over our discomfort on our own behalf or ostensibly on our children's, and we have to use that privilege to learn more and do more so that we can widen the circle over and over. When we believe in the rights and inherent worth and dignity of LGBTQ folks, we have to recognize and work to ameliorate the struggles, and we also have to celebrate the joy. John Oliver, again, this is a quote, said, "Hope and joy are crucial here. They are the fuel that powers the ongoing fight for equality. And while there is a lot of fear and uncertainty right now, it is worth remembering that progress, while not always linear, is always possible. We're working toward the goal of every trans kid knowing they are loved, valued, and indispensable." That's what he said. And that's the goal for every LGBTQ child, youth, adult, and elder, to know the fullness of themselves and be free to express that and share that in the world with safety and with comfort, without fear, without having to hide. The goal is for every single LGBTQ person to know that they are loved beyond measure and that their radiance joins with ours always. May we continue to use our time, energy, money, and voices to fight for not only justice for our LGBTQ siblings, but also may we use them to protect and to celebrate those LGBTQ folks, joining in affirmation of their human birthright, safety, compassion, joy, and love. So may it be.